You don't necessarily have to get into the dollar amounts, but this example had like you could put beans and say this is how many of the beans go to the school or the library or right the college that we all went to that we have a connection to.
Never. Fuck, never.
Never. Okay, so record the intro now.
So what did Milkless? Because I think we start with the name.
Two dads. We love our kids, but then we also need them to know that we're like pretty cool and it's not like a wimpy podcast. So, hey. Hey, Milkless.
Hey, welcome. Hey,
Milkless. Call the audience, Milkless. What's up, Milkless? Matt and Max coming at you.
What if that's it? That's our first take. On this episode of the podcast, we're going to talk about service, giving back, doing good with your kids, obviously. That's like what we talk about here mostly. We got a great guest. We got our buddy Simon Salgado. Max and I have known this guy for decades because we are old, and he has put a lot of thought into how to do this with his family. We also kind of dabble in talking about, privilege and the relationship between that and responsibility and how to instill that in your kids without shitting on them for being born lucky. Here we go.
All right, Matt, today we're talking about service, and this is when, in the game of tennis, when you actually serve the ball.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Just kidding. We're talking about you volunteer or giving back, and how do we do that in our lives and with our kids? I mean, we're busy as fuck. We have our friend Simon Salgado on again. I think he's doing this in a decent manner for his family. So, Matt, how do you want to get into this?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting idea because you want to raise kids who are the kind of people who, like on a fundamental level, want to help others and probably, too, who recognize the ways in which they are lucky and try to level that playing field. So how are you thinking about this? What are the things that you're doing with your kids? And maybe give us a refresher, too, on how old your kids are, if anybody didn't catch the other episode.
And thanks for coming on, Simon.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, dude. So good to be with you guys. And it's a fun topic, and it's one that's near and dear to my heart. So our boys are 11, 9, and almost 7. Handful, a lot of fun, rambunctious, high energy. And, as we think about raising them to be good people, of course, we want our kids to be happy, but part of raising good humans is making sure that they understand that there's more than just their needs and that they think about being empathetic and making an impact that's bigger than themselves. And so we've tried to start thinking about it young, but like all parents, it's, we're busy. We don't do a lot of sort of structured religion. And I think that can often be a place where kids are, getting exposed to a lot of service and charity. So I think the big question for us is, okay, if it's not that, then how do we build that into their lives? Because it's important and we want them to be exposed to it.
Mm-hmm. And you were saying you want your kids to be happy. Helping other people is a pretty good path to being happy, too. Instilling that so that they do good in the world, but it's also instilling that as a value that generally leads human adults to feel better.
Yeah, and I think of like one of the worst qualities maybe any of us would want of our kids is for them to be like spoiled, only thinking about themselves, selfish, egotistical, whatever adjective you want to use. And so building empathy, I think is a great point, Matt. It's not just about that it's good, but it actually makes them good people, makes them fulfilled, makes them happier.
Yeah. And you know what? You guys just kind of teed me up with a little study that we can use to round us out as we dive in here. It's been well documented that volunteering or acts of service for adults lead to better mental health, better physical health. Google it. It's incredible for adults. There's not a ton of data on children, but a study came out in 2023, one of those umbrella studies where they just looked at a ton of other different studies. So it was like 22,000 children aged 6 to 11 and around 30,000 adolescents, 12 to 17. And volunteering was associated with higher odds of excellent or very good health in the children, also associated with higher odds of flourishing in the children, lower odds of anxiety in adolescents, and also associated with lower odds of behavioral problems in children and adolescents. So could be correlation. I'm not sure if it's exactly causality. Could just be, look, if these parents are volunteering, maybe they're, going to create environments that are better for their children, but it could also be actually correlation.
Yeah, it does like make sense to me that like having a life that actively includes like thinking about other people and thinking about helping other people is kind of a balm to a lot of the things that it seems like ails both adults, but particularly like you hear a lot about adolescent kids these days are having so much trouble. And I think a lot of that gets tied to social media. We all kind of feel increasingly like we live in this country that's a business where mostly like you look out for yourself. This loss of like a sense of collectivism and this kind of like navel-gazy it's funny, you hear the word narcissism a lot. And I think when you hear narcissism, people think just people who are in love with themselves. But really all it means is just constantly self-obsessed, which can also be like beating the shit out of yourself and being hyper self-critical. So I
Or just
think
living in your own little fucking world.
living in your own little world. Yeah. And so I think that just kind of having intrinsic to you and like really internalize this sense of responsibility, the community around you, and some sense of kind of collective purpose seems like, yeah, that makes sense that would make you happier, especially kind of in this day and age.
So Simon, a question I have for you is, I'd love to hear what you've done with your family over the years. But then also the secondary question is like, how the hell do you fit it in when we had you on previously on a When Equals Now episode talking about the sports and the weekends, the birthday parties? How do you even fit this stuff in at all?
Yeah. I mean, it's tough to build it in. And so I'd love to sit here and say, hey, every week we're doing service and volunteering. It's not the case, but I think we do make a really concerted and thoughtful effort to participate and give back at various points during the year. Everything from when the kids were young. The United Way of Rhode Island did actually a really great family event. I haven't seen a ton of these, but it was a great one where we all got together. We built sock puppets for kids who didn't have, something for the holidays. And we filled rice bags to make massage coolie, hot, cold things for folks. And, but like they did something with their hands, and it was really fun. They were young at the time. I think they were maybe 3, 5, and 7. And so it was a great thing that we could go in and do as a family. We've done through the school ends up being, I think, where a lot of the service does happen. Again, we're not part of a church or synagogue. And so the school's done a great job, I think, of helping us to be invested in our community. I mean, picking up trash at the park where they play. And hey, we have a responsibility to make sure that the park that we play in looks clean. The really satisfying thing about that is when you're done, you have a whole bag of trash. You see everybody does. And when you throw it all in the middle, it's actually really rewarding to see that, oh, I actually contributed to this park being a beautiful place to play. And there's that, local component that's really cool.
And that thing alone, like just doing a trash cleanup, whether at a park or a beach, you don't need to tell them not to litter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because they're picking up the trash. Like it'll just be built in. Like I can't litter because I just spent 2 hours like cleaning this thing up. It's like I'd be taking a step backward in the work I did.
Totally. And so, and I think doing it with them is important.
And it's nice too, because that's like a thing that like a 5-year-old can do. Because that's part of the challenge too, is like, what can a 5-year-old do to change the world? Let's target on something where they can do it well and they have like a tangible sense of that accomplishment, that pile in the middle at the end. They're like, yeah, I did that.
I'd say one thing on a slightly different end of the spectrum is, I do think that learning at a young age that money is an important driver and it can actually help advance causes that are important is actually pretty powerful. And that even kids at a very young age can start to learn and understand that. And so on that side, I know you guys have talked about allowance here on the show before. We started when the kids were super young, between 4 and 5, giving them an allowance. And we would give them 75 cents a week, and they would have these 3 buckets. One would be for spending on whatever they wanted. One of them would be to save for something that they wanted to save up for in the long term. And then a third one would be to share. And at the end of every year, we add up everything that's in that share. My wife and I match it dollar for dollar. Mm-hmm. And then they get to choose the charity or charities that they want to give that to. And we talked about things, when they were super young, well, you like the zoo and you like animals. And so like, oh, that's good. So they started donating to the zoo. But then they've gotten global as they've gotten older and they've gotten exposed to a lot of the horrible things going on in the Middle East conflict in Gaza and Israel. And so they learned about World Central Kitchen and they made a portion of their donation to that organization so that they can help with humanitarian aid. And so even though it's not big dollars, it actually, I think, makes a big difference in terms of them seeing themselves as agents of change, and that dollar of theirs, they can choose how to spend it and make the world a better place through their choices.
You know what else it does that's cool? When my oldest is 6.5. And so for the most part, she does not know about things like wars that are happening. She doesn't quite have that like global view yet of really bad shit happens. But one of the scariest things about that is a feeling of helplessness, of like how big it is and not being able to do anything about it. So like you said, even though the dollar amount is small, the fact that they can say, no, but I am trying, like I'm doing what I can, that reframes that in a pretty big way to give them some agency. So they're not just in this big world where horrible things are happening. They have a role in that.
It's a part. And when a lot of folks band together and do something, it can add up to something big, just like that pile of trash, right? When everybody makes these little donations, it actually adds up to quite a big impact. And, if you read the reports, they can understand where their dollars went. And they can feel proud of their impact on that cause.
Yeah, and it's also similar to the trash cleanup thing. Instead of telling your kids, we don't litter, going and picking up the trash just makes it real. Like instead of telling your kids like, oh, there's, poor people in the world that blah, blah, blah. The very fact that they have this money just sitting in a jar or wherever it is for a year, thinking that this is going to go help people, it primes the pump for them to kind of be thinking like, where could I give this? And it's a really cool way to do it.
As adults, we give to charities too. I know you guys, contribute as well. And I read this idea of do you have the kids actually participate in that process with you? You don't necessarily have to get into the dollar amounts, but this example had you could put beans and say, this is how many of the beans go to the school or the library or the college that we all went to that, we have a connection to.
Never. Fuck, never.
Never.
Have you heard that John Mulaney bit where he's like, I got a letter from my college. It was like, we noticed you haven't given me money lately. And I said, that's interesting. I noticed you haven't fucking taught me anything lately. I already gave you.
Anyway,
I did see that.
Simon, everything else you've said on this program has been pure fucking gold. That was horseshit.
Had to call it out.
I'm kidding. I feel bad every time I get the text from the people. They're like, we're trying to reach some sort of goal. I can't bring myself to do it.
Really? So what about you, Maddie? You don't get back to Brownie?
No, I think most universities are essentially hedge funds with an educational front at this point. I think it's kind of bullshit. They got so much fucking money. I just looked it up. The Brown University's endowment is $6.6 billion. That's more than I have, so I don't think I need to give things to them.
It's not quite 7, so, but whatever it is. So that might be a good reason. Does Brown need that money, right? And so, just bringing your kids into the conversation and saying, these are the areas that our family gives to and letting them have some sort of either say or opinion.
Well, it's like critical thinking, too, and it's just it's a good exercise for a million different reasons, yeah.
You could do that at the dinner table.
Yeah, let's have a half-hour conversation about what's important.
Here are the 10 we're considering or something. And even if it's $100, whatever it is, it's a good idea.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Violet Archer and the Case of the Purple Martin. Now, if you haven't read it yet, I got one question. How long are you going to keep mooching off me and Matt listening to this podcast for free?
This is the angriest movies we've ever done.
I literally was going to ask you something and it just popped into my head. I'm trying to be funny. I actually don't care. Please keep listening to the podcast forever for free. We do it for you and just because we love chatting with each other.
Look, as my daughter loves to say to me, how dare you? All right.
I'm kidding. Please keep listening.
We're kidding. But Max, here's something that's not funny at all. Where can they buy it?
Check the podcast description for a link to buy the book or search Violet Archer on Amazon and buy it there.
Only if you want.
I'd love to dig into this a little bit. I mean, this is kind of embarrassing, but I remember my oldest kid, I probably said something like, you're ungrateful for this. I got you a bike and you don't know, there's people starving in the world. And he's like, what? I just Googled kids with dirt floors. And we just watched a 5-minute video.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, you see?
You got it good.
That also was quite powerful. but
sometimes you need to throw the hammer down to break through.
Yeah, but we didn't do anything. And he started asking, how can we help?
Yeah.
And we talked about it for that was probably 2 years where that would come up every once in a while. I'm like, you have it pretty good, bud, blah, blah. Remember those kids or this or that? And he's like, what are we going to do to help them? I'm like, well, we will. And then I got busy and never really did anything. And then I Google homeless shelters. I Google the homeless shelter and it's like the sock puppet thing. It's really good.
Yeah.
But you don't see the plight in the world. And that is a little self-serving for me. A part of it is wanting to give back, but part of it also equally is wanting my kids to see an accurate worldview. Mm-hmm. This is where I get a little fucked up because I start to think are my motives, they're not truly, altruistic. For example, we donate money to the school for less fortunate kids to buy Christmas presents. We buy the Christmas presents, we wrap them and we drop them off. But that's nameless and that's fine. And that's good. But then it's similar to something, Matt, you always say on the program, kids don't learn by what you tell them. They learn by, showing them.
They watch it.
And they watch the world. So if we're giving this into some amorphous thing, yes, we are like helping the greater good. But I feel like your kids could still grow up being a little tone deaf. So that's what was tough for me, that every time I Google like homeless shelters, they'd be like, oh, your kids are too young, but they can come stuff cans in a bag. And I guess that probably would have been good. And I probably should have done that because it's just priming the pump for service. But I selfishly...
You wanted them to be more connected to...
Yeah. I want them to see that thing. And I'll jump right to I emailed this homeless shelter and they said that, the youngest people who could come would be 12. I said, we're going to be like 6 families. I knew I could get other families to do it, but the kids are as young as 3, really well behaved. We'd love to bring in a meal for the 200 people in the 90 families in this homeless shelter. And they were like, we don't usually do this, but go ahead. And we cooked for 200 people and we served it. And that was like where we could talk about it for weeks afterward.
That's awesome.
But now that's also, as an adult, I never knew where to give money because there's so many causes, like so much pain and suffering. I got analysis paralysis. It's like, where do you give it?
Yeah.
Now we have a connection to that homeless shelter in Salt Lake, and I can picture the faces of the people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I do think there are a lot of families out there that want to do more, but just don't know how to participate, and they need it maybe to be a little bit easier. But I mean, Max, it's a great story about if you just ask, there may actually be a way for the whole family to get involved, even if it's not still served on a silver platter for you.
I'm curious, Simon, because I was thinking about this, Maxie, while you were talking. Like, how much do you put it in terms for your kids of like, you are fortunate in these ways, so you have a responsibility to try to do things for people who aren't fortunate in these ways? I think we're like, you hear the word privilege a lot lately. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot about that is really good, because I do think part of the pitfall of having privilege is that it's kind of invisible. Like, everybody is hyper aware when things are not going well for them, but when things are going well, it just kind of starts to feel like the air. But it also, I think, is at times used as a cudgel. Like, you should feel ashamed of having been born fortunate. And that sucks. Like, nobody should feel ashamed of the situation that they were born into. Like, that's just what happened. So I'm curious how you frame that for your kids in terms of responsibility, privilege, like those kinds of ideas.
Yeah, I think there is something to that. I think we very much lean into, you guys have a lot that not everybody has. You guys have food, clothes, a great community, a great house. A lot of folks aren't privileged to have sometimes even any of those things. And so we want to remind them when we're doing some of these things, or if they're being a little surly about it, that they've got it pretty good. And it is tough for them to understand that. And I don't think we try to hold it over their heads in any kind of way to make them feel shameful. But I think it is an important part of the discussion that they're fortunate. We're fortunate. We're fortunate as a family. And I think the old Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, I think kind of applies, and they can kind of understand that. And I think that translates even for little kids.
Yeah, it's cool putting in terms of like, you are fortunate in these ways, so you have the power, you have the responsibility. And that's very different from like something that comes with some kind of like, you fucked up. Because I do think that it can slip into that pretty easily.
Yeah.
But if you were born affluent and then you don't do shit to help anybody, then like you did kind of fuck up a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but it's not like, you don't want it to feel like a penance or an atonement, but you do want them to feel that weight, that responsibility, that they've got it pretty good. And not everyone's parents are, asking 3 kids to what they want for breakfast and short order cook in the back.
Yeah. Fucking hell.
The thing is, do you ever use any stank? Like, I remember my parents saying like, there are kids starving in Africa. Like, you ever lob that in?
I feel like my wife is a little better about, throwing on that level of guilt sometimes. But I will say there, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but there's a lot of food waste in our house. I don't know about you guys, but like we try, but it's, I feel like it just comes with the territory no matter what you do.
Yeah. Well, and it's also just like, it is impossible for kids to be objective about their circumstances.
Yeah.
The only thing they know is the life they've had. So it's very hard for them to be appreciative.
Yeah.
It's like the air. This is just what it is.
Yeah.
That made me think of something that I actually do feel pretty strongly about. And I don't say this to negate anything that we've said so far, because like, I agree with you, Simon, like finding that playground cleanup, that's something that you can always point back to. It's like, remember this thing we did together. Yeah. Remember that feeling that it gave you.
Yeah.
But the truth is, like, here we are as adults trying to work that into a couple of weekends a year. So probably what we're instilling them is like, work it into a couple of weekends a year. I like that you drew the distinction, Simon, between like the financial, that like they have this portion of their allowance that's devoted to that, because I do think that's a pretty different muscle to flex. One is like your sweat equity going and doing something. And the other is like, if you make good money, some of it should not stay in your bank account. But there's probably another set of soft skills or just like a way of being in the world that will translate to not just like, 3 or 4 times a year we go do something, but I chose a profession in which I make a little less money because I feel like what I do is ultimately good for the world. Or we had our buddy Bez on the show. Since college, if he's walking and he sees trash on the ground, he picks it up. He's done that his whole life. So yes, I want to pepper those moments of like, we did this cleanup or we gave this money, and they're things you can really point to and recall. But I think almost more important to that is like, how do you work it into your everyday life so it is just part of the ethos?
So maybe it's in 3 parts. There's the monetary, there's the like actually like helping out with your time, actually giving time as service. But the third one is just like your ongoing thing. Like, I won't pick up like dirty trash, but if it's like clean trash, like there's no yuckiness, but like if it's a really yucky piece of trash, I might just leave it.
Oh, you know what I just remembered? So when I don't remember how old I was, but I did a beach cleanup through school, and I was cleaning up trash and I was crushing it. And then I found this thing and I was like, what is that? Like, is that like the inside of like a popsicle?
Oh, no.
Like, I don't know. And I picked it up and I put it in the trash. And then this girl was like, dang, you're really brave. And I was like, why? And that's how I learned what a tampon was.
You pick it up by the string?
Yeah, I think I picked it up by the string.
With your teeth? Oh boy.
Well, I had trash in both my hands. So, you do what you got to do. I was
giving back to the community.
Dedicated to the cause.
Well, I have a question. Well, what do you think about this? I have a good friend that you both know that I worked with for a while. He basically said one time, like when I was stressed out about this, it was like late night, we were on a business trip, and I was like, I feel like there's so much injustice in the world. Like, how can we help out? He's like, dude, just work hard, make a shitload of money. You'll be able to help the world way more if you can write a fat check. And it's like, that's just logically correct. So how do you reconcile that? Like, this homeless shelter, I'll give you the real truth. The way I got them to let us do this is I said, we're going to donate a lot of money. So let us come.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like,
yeah,
I'm sure we helped a little bit with the food, but really,
I heard this interview with this, like, I can't remember who he was, but he was like a very well-established expert in the nonprofit world. And he said, one of the main problems we have getting really high caliber people to work in nonprofits is that extraordinarily high caliber people make that calculation that actually they could help this organization more by going and working for a hedge fund and then donating $1 million to it than they could by going and making $80,000 a year working their ass off. But there's something fucked up about that.
Yeah.
It does work logically, but not at scale or something.
I don't think there's anything wrong. I think if you go to any nonprofit, there's no nonprofit that's going to tell you they've got enough funding to do the good work that they want to do. And so the people who can write those big checks can make a really big difference. And I think that's we're trying to instill our kids, whether they can write a big check or not, right? Flex that muscle, learn that you can have an impact. You can choose what causes you want to advance, but you don't start there. So like, what can you do along the way to just, like you said, Matt, build it into the way you just exist in the world. And so there's a lot of good that we can do every day. And it doesn't have to be $1 million worth of good. It could just be, throwing the tampon into the trash can.
Yeah.
Saving the beach, baby.
You're brave, Matt. You're brave.
Only in my ignorance am I brave.
It's an old doll's mouse toy.
Oh, man. But I do because of that, I do like, Simon, I like that you make that distinction, that you have that piece of the kids' allowance that is peeled off for like monetary donation. But yeah, we can't just do that. We're also going to find these service opportunities. We're also going to demonstrate just in day-to-day life that, you pick up trash. And I even think about it like in relationships at school, because I'm sure this is something that most parents do. You try to really have your kid be the kid who, like, if somebody's left out or if somebody's younger or if somebody's whatever at school or if somebody's getting bullied, like you want your kid to be the one who's like going to stick up for that kid. For a 6-year-old or even a 10-year-old, that's a level where they can really affect change. But what they are fundamentally learning is that when somebody is having something happen to them that is unfair because they have less power, they have a job to do there. instilling that might point them more to a life of service than any number of like beach cleanups or homeless shelter visits or any of those stuff that you can do. I'm not saying you shouldn't do those. I think they're really useful as something to point to and as shared experiences. And even just in and of themselves, they're a good thing to do as a family, obviously. But I think there's some soft skills work that maybe has a more profound impact. And you can't just do it for your kids. You actually have to do it yourself.
Yeah.
Or they won't listen to you.
Yeah, 100%.
Does that make you feel better, Matt, that you haven't done the homeless or the beach cleanup yet?
Yeah, that's what I keep telling myself.
I'm kidding. I completely agree.
Well, dude, both of y'all, I am like inspired, maybe too strong word, because y'all are just a couple of fuckheads, but I am impressed and motivated by how thoughtful you've been with your kids about this.
I think, my game plan going forward is going to be a once a year touchstone to kind of keep it fresh. Mm-hmm. And that is strictly for the kids. Like, I know that we're helping people, but it's mainly so they kind of feel that. 2, I want to steal Simon's thing of the portion of their allowance goes towards something, because then we can be talking about it all, because things come up, you're in the car, you drive by something, ideas happen throughout the year, and it can be like, oh, that's something you can give to. And you can kind of keep that as an ongoing through line. And then the third thing is, Matt, what you said is the everyday, like making service a part of whatever, because I'm always trying to get to the next thing, but like doing a little more through the day to day. And that's the trifecta, I think. Which
ends up making you feel good.
Yeah.
You always feel good when you do it.
Simon, any other things that you've done over the years?
Actually, I know I'm bringing in kind of the theme from before, but Max, you're talking about, right? Did you write a check or do you do the good work? When the kids were learning about what was going on in Ukraine early on at school, they were asking, hey, well, what can we do? And they came up with this idea themselves to, well, let's do a lemonade stand and let's actually donate some of the proceeds. They weren't completely altruistic. Like, well, we want some of that, but they were like, let's donate like a third, like the money jar, like a third, But they did, and it was like you can do well and you can do good, and I think that's actually a nice lesson that you don't have to pick, and right, there's always room to find a way to
exploit a war for cash.
For a little bit of coin.
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
So proud of you boys.
But it is fucking smart.
Yeah.
What, you're not gonna get lemonade for Ukraine? Are you fucking serious? It's only $8.
That's good. That's good.
But that's like these big touchstones. But I think like Matt, I love your idea, right? Just like it doesn't have to be grand, right?
And the last thing I was thinking of, so we've started putting socks in our car. That wasn't because we saw a homeless person and I was like, we should do this. That was because we saw a homeless person and my daughter was basically like, why aren't we helping him?
Totally.
So they fucking know.
They see. Yeah. They ask the good questions.
And it's funny. I watch like my 2-year-old now, or almost 2-year-old. She'll walk down the road. Somebody walks by, it's a stranger. Hi beetle. Hi butterfly. Hi tree. Like, she gets it. Yeah. These are all things that have value and deserve to be said hello to. And all people are people.
They haven't learned to not make eye contact.
Exactly.
With homeless people. Don't look.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So just don't shut that down and find a way to empower them to like follow that instinct, Yeah. I mean, in some ways, kids can be so outlandishly selfish. It's hilarious. But in other ways, their awareness of our basic shared humanity, you're kind of born with that and then it gets trained out of us. It's not like you got to instill that.
100%.
Stoke it, direct it, give them a way to make that be productive. And I love that.
Hey, can we, I look, I don't know if it'll make it in, but can we talk about your BJ Smile reception speech? Are we allowed to?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that people need to know.
So basically, I didn't know how to smile until I met my wife. I smiled like this.
Showing upper and bottom teeth.
Upper and bottom and no wideness. And I don't know why. I thought that's how one smiled when you were taking a picture. And so
you were smiling for others, not for yourself. It was a tragic set of circumstances.
A total tragedy. And so my wife's name starts with a J. She took me under her wing and, pointed out when I was smiling naturally and said, that's a nice smile. You should right there remember what that feels like instead of smiling like a serial killer. And so my serial killer smile was known as the BJ smile, or before my wife,
your wife, whose name starts with J.
Yes.
Well, here's what I remember from your reception speech. I remember the line because you told this story and it was very heartwarming. But then you said the word BJ smile, and we all started giggling, and I don't think you knew why. But then the line that I remember when I actually couldn't believe what was happening, you turned to your now wife and you said, "Now that I've found you, I will never again have another BJ smile."
Yeah. Wow. And I really didn't realize it at the time. It was an honest moment.
This episode of Milkweed is brought to you by Violet Archer in the case of the Purple Martin. Thank you. Bye.